Hello there. Now, as I've mentioned in the comments, at the moment I'm busy finishing off a non-fiction book, which is due for delivery to the publisher fairly soon, so I'm in the last stages of writing, and then after that I need to go on and check it all fits together, write things like the introduction, conclusion, you've got chronologies, you've got all sorts of other bits and bobs to put in, and just make sure that it's in good shape when it goes in. The idea is to try and present something that doesn't need too much editing, which does, as a consequence of this, mean that I haven't got too much time to spend making videos. So I thought I'd get this one in while we've only just last week had the comments on the 11th episode of the HBO Rome drama series. Let's round off Series 1, Season 1, and we'll take a break from it after this because I think everybody's got an element of fatigue by this time, and it's been quite a long haul with any of these things that's as long as that. So we'll probably come back and do the second series sometime or other, but it's not quite as good as the first series. It feels so very rushed because of all the production changes that occurred, and in some cases some of the history is even more iffy than before. So today we'll look at episode 12, the Kalends of February, and this is the one that culminates in the murder of Julius Caesar. So we've got that element of real history going on, but in fact this is very much a character-based episode. It's one of the ones where different story threads of our cast are brought together, and as has happened in the last few, some people don't figure very much at all. There's not a lot of Attia, there's not a lot of Mark Antony, Octavian is barely there as well. It's very much Pullo and Vorenus, and then to an extent Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, and you get people like Simba and Cinna and others who start to appear. Casca, not Simba, sorry, not Cinna, sorry. You do have Simba, you do have Casca appear, and various other conspirators that we haven't really introduced, and the Quintus Pompey, whatever he's called, the annoying illegitimate, the annoying character. No offense to the actor who does his job well, but it's I found it strange, and I think in the end they didn't quite know what to do with him anymore either. So it's a little bit about that. We get a lot of stuff about Vorenus. You see early on he and his family go out for some dedication ceremony with some land that they've recently purchased or been granted by Caesar. I think it's probably a grant as part of the army things. I don't know. I'm not really an expert in the field of ritual. Well, ritual in fields, I suppose, in this case. I'm not sure where they got all that stuff from, so I won't comment on that in too much detail. I think, again, it's trying to make the Romans as peculiar, as alien to us as possible, whilst having, family moments. There's the comic element of it all, in that it's just a pretty bizarre scene. You have Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, having a bad dream, a nightmare. These sort of birds flock together to look like a skull. Of course, again, this is something that those who know their Shakespeare would be familiar with. Calpurnia having bad dreams of Caesar's death or something terrible happening, and trying to dissuade him on the morning of the Ides of March from going to the Senate. We don't get a lot of background about the build-up to the conspiracy. Brutus, from the end of the last episode, has become determined to murder Julius Caesar. He's throwing himself in with the other conspirators. You see a meeting where Servilia is also present, and it's Servilia, interestingly, they present as saying that should only kill Caesar. This is not a revolution that's going to slaughter people. This is simply killing a tyrant because there is no place for someone with supreme power within the Republic. They don't really develop that idea too much, and you don't get traces of the other moments of provocation and problems, like the Lupercalia, when Mark Antony offers a crown to Caesar, and the crowd cheers him when he refuses it 3 times, and all this sort of thing, and or present any interpretation of that. Was that Caesar hoping to be made king, or trying to deal with rumours that he wanted to be king by showing that, look, even if offered it, he wouldn't take it, all this sort of thing. He didn't win, either way it was presented, it ends up with him becoming less popular amongst the elite, not necessarily amongst the wider crowd. They do present the conspirators as very much a group of senators acting on their own, which is right and is fair enough. They don't really explain their motives in any sense. It's all quite limited and rather rushed, and you don't get a sense of... the big thing, of course, is that Caesar is planning to leave Rome and go off and wage war on the Danube and then have an expedition against the Parthians, and that he's appointed magistrates for the next 3 years inclusive. So he's presumably planning on being away for that length of time. And the reason that they strike on the Ides of March, and the reason they get so worried when Caesar's late to the meeting of the Senate, is because they don't think they're going to get another opportunity. If they don't kill him now, he's gone for 3 years and he's going to come back with glory of winning another great victory. Cicero would later claim that he didn't think Caesar would come back at all. Not sure what the basis for that is, whether that was simply wishful thinking in the, as liberty hasn't returned to the Republic after the murder of Caesar, and in fact you've got Mark Antony, who Cicero loathes in a way that he never loathed Caesar. He could at least get on with Caesar personally, find him good company. Antony was just, too different a personality, that little bit younger as well, so sense of a different generation. Cicero could not respect him in any way whatsoever. So you don't get that. So that's a major aspect of things that they ignore. They also, and I'm rather glad they do this, they don't have Cleopatra bobbing up in Rome and sticking her in. She will appear in the next series, but she's not seen as a provocation. Oh, Caesar wants to be a king, he wants to have a queen, all this sort of thing. The scene where Caesar and Calpurnia are in bed and she has her nightmare, and she tries to urge him to sort of give up, basically retire. She's not, again, they're not talking about let's go off, why don't you go off on campaign for a few years. It's let's stop. That is one of the few occasions where we see the character in the series. She's appeared a little bit more when Caesar was in Rome in the early stages of the Civil War, and to do with the breakup between Caesar and Servilia, which of course is our main character-driven motive in the story for why Caesar will get murdered, that Servilia has turned against him and wants revenge. So you have this, but it's very much... You could argue that, well, perhaps we're just supposed to assume that all of this is going on. It's just we don't need to know it for the particular stories of our characters. You've had, as I say, it's very much Pullo and Vorenus. You have, from the start, the talk of, their heroes, and Vorenus isn't sure whether Caesar's going to have him punished or reward him. And you have that meeting where... after Antony and Caesar have been discussing various projects, with a great map of Rome unrolled on the floor of, I think it's their Senate House set. Though again, reminder, as we've said repeatedly, the Curia Julia hasn't been finished yet, isn't built, isn't in use, and the old Senate House have been burnt down in the during the funeral of Clodius, several years before the Civil War. So there isn't one. That the Senate meets in various temples where there's suitable space and it's considered to be an appropriate setting. So you have Caesar not only deciding that, well, I'm not going to punish either Pullo for his original crime or Vorenus for stopping the execution by coming in and killing the last gladiator. We've seen a stage performance that's done this in a comic way and how everybody loves them and all this sort of thing. Again, not sure this is really plausible, but the way they present it within the logic of the show, I suppose. And you have Caesar surprising Antony and Posca by not only sparing Vorenus and any punishment, and also Pullo, but Pullo doesn't really get the rewards, but he makes Vorenus a senator, and they're surprised. And then this is Caesar presents the argument that, oh well, you've told me I need more bodyguards, I'm not going to do that, it looks wrong, I should only have friends here, but on the other hand, if I've got tough Vorenus, the man who's just taken out one of the nastiest gladiators in Rome, former Primus Pilus, distinguished soldier, and anyone who's watched the series will know a man not to be trifled with when it comes to any form of violence, because he's very good at it, then who's going to dare to attack me? What sort of portly senator is going to risk taking on the virile Vorenus? That scene has a sense of Caesar's ambitions, his projects. He's talking about diverting the river Tiber to prevent flooding. Again, there were an awful lot of plans. He was planning on draining the Pomptine marshes, things like that, something would only actually be achieved by Mussolini in the 20th century, partly then anyway. So Caesar did have all these grand projects, but of course the grandest of all is the big war. And he's doing lots of things in Rome. And they do, I suppose, through this give a sense of his restless energy, that he wants to do this and wants to improve that. Again, in general, as far as we can see, most of his proposals, like his reform of the calendar, were sensible, were practical, were for the benefit of the Commonwealth, the Republic, the state. They're a little bit skeptical about this, and you've had, when his conversation with Calpurnia, where she wants him to retire, basically saying, well, there's just too much to do. And you do have that sense, but again, there's a lot to do because he's not planning to be in Rome for much longer. He's going off to fight a war, and then in 3 years' time, who knows what the situation would be. So that's interesting enough. You also have then the admission to the Senate, along with Varenus, of large numbers of Gauls, and Antony talks about long-haired Gauls, and so Gallia Comata, long-haired Gaul, was the region north of Mondé-Provence, Roman Transalpine Gaul, the province they'd occupied since the latter part of the 2nd century BC, north of the Alps. Gallia Comata was the bigger, sort of wilder area, and they're sort of joking about went next to be Belgians and all this sort of thing. Now, Caesar did admit Gauls into the Senate. Looking at them and what evidence there is, these were men from Cisalpine Gaul. Now that's the area that, although it's called Gaul, is south of the Alps and has been part of the Roman Republic for some time. Now Caesar in the past had lobbied, even in his early career, for those in Cisalpine Gaul to get full Roman citizenship. Now, obviously, when anybody starts fiddling with who's eligible to vote and in what capacity, particularly with the elite that influence the key voting groups in the Comitia Centuriata that determines the consuls every year, you can see this as meant to, well, he wants to put lots of people in his debt, so they'll vote for him and they'll vote for his friends. On the other hand, it also, Caesar does seem to have had a different view as to how the Republic should work and just who should be Roman. There are probably men from Transalpine Gaul as well, but you can see in Caesar's commentaries how he deals with the aristocracy of this area and treats them very much as, not perhaps equals because he's a Roman senator, but nevertheless men of distinction and worth. The odds are that he wasn't introducing anybody who wasn't already fluent in Latin and Roman educated. You get these jokes. Cicero tells a few of them about men taking off their trousers and putting on a toga to go to the Senate. There was a poster was put up in public saying, here's a good deed for the Republic. Don't tell any of the new senators how to find the Senate meeting. This sort of thing. But it wasn't, they present it rather more. I mean, you have these long-haired, bearded fellows in togas stroll in and provoking contempt from Brutus Cassius and others who are sort of watching from a sort of balcony area that I haven't really noticed before, and I don't know whether they put in for the benefit of this scene and then subsequently so people can look down on the murdered Caesar when we get to the Ides of March later on. The numbers are probably fairly few compared to the very large number of people that Caesar adds to the Senate. The Senate from Sulla's day, so this is, 80s, early 70s BC, had doubled in size from about 300 in the past to about 600. During Caesar's dictatorship, it rises to somewhere between 800 and 900, and in the aftermath of that, it'll go to short of 1,000, but it's pushing in that direction. A lot of these are people that Caesar's rewarding for having served him well. The Gallic contingent, whether Cisalpine or Transalpine Gaul, there's probably nobody from Gallia Comata at this stage, is only a minority of the new accessions. And this idea, it'll give them a majority all the time. Well, bear in mind, the Senate's been voting sycophantically for everything Caesar wants for months. Some of them are even people that had fought with Marius against Sulla back in that early civil war, and their families had been barred from politics forever. Caesar restored their political rights, and so people are coming in that way. He's increased the number of magistrates. There are 40 quaestors now. And there are something like 14 praetors in each year. So there's a need for more senators. There's also a need for Caesar to reward people. So it's a mixture of things. And the idea of somebody like Varenus, who, Cicero dismissed as a pleb and sort of no offence, old man. Apart from, again, we've talked about this before, Cicero himself was a pleb, as was most of the aristocracy by this time. And it's the vast majority. There are a few patricians like Caesar around, but there's not a lot of them. He's someone who's been a primus pilus. He has been made an equestrian. He's been a prefect during the last war. So actually, that's a fairly logical career. He's the sort of man who would be considered. He'd risen to a stage where he is just below the senatorial class anyway. So, by the standards of the day, it's not implausible that Caesar would reward someone with that career, not possibly in these circumstances, but more generally by making him a senator. There are complaints later on. There are lots of former centurions amongst the men that Caesar's put in the Senate, and some of these will be chucked out by Augustus once he's established, once he's won the civil wars, in an attempt to make the Senate look more dignified. So you have, as I say, they've taken bits from the history. They've slightly skewed it into a way that doesn't really make political sense and reflect what's going on, but not terribly. But it's quite an interesting period when this is happening. This will be part of the wider thing. Bear in mind, we'll do this when we do I Claudius at some point in the future. Claudius introduced senators from beyond Transalpine Gaul, from the old Gallia Comata that had been turned into the settled provinces of Gaul, and part of his speech is preserved on an inscription. A version of it's given in Tacitus, where he's sort of explaining this is how Rome has grown, but also the implication is that there was resentment from existing senators that somehow adding these foreigners, even though they'd be Roman citizens, you're not introducing anybody who's not a Roman, is degrading, is somehow reducing the status, the grandeur of the Senate. And of course, from a more practical point of view, look at any political system where you have set groups that vote in particular ways. Those who know how the system works don't tend to like change unless it very clearly favours them. So for anyone who's worked out this is how I operate in the Senate of this day, suddenly adding a few hundred more members unbalances things. It means you've got to learn and trade favours with new people and learn what the balance is, in the same way that you change constituency boundaries, this sort of thing. You get this different mix. So you can understand the resentment. They build this into a bigger thing. This is almost the sort of the last straw, although Brutus and Cassius, we know, have already decided to murder Caesar, Cassius earlier on, and Brutus has got there as well. So it's presented in that way, but it's not... It's small fry, really. Again, I suppose you can come back to this idea that all the stuff about the Lupercal, all the stuff about Caesar going off on his war, all the rumours of prophecies of what Caesar was planning to do, what he wanted to do, the way he was treating the Senate, consuls, this sort of thing, the speed with which he's carrying out all these reforms, introducing all these rulings, and often not really telling people how he's doing it or presenting it as a fait accompli. Cicero jokes about being thanked by communities for having voted and spoken in favour of them being given particular rights when no such debate had occurred. He hadn't been present. Caesar's just gone on and presented it as if it was all done properly. And it's not that Cicero is objecting to the end result and the decision that was made. It's all about the way things were done, and that's vital, really, to the grievance that people like Brutus feel, is that however well Caesar is doing and governing things, he shouldn't have the power to do this. He shouldn't be doing it in this way. Nobody should. This is not how the Republic is supposed to function. So you have this, and as I say, it's mostly about the personal stories. You have Pullo recovering from his terrible wounds when he's fighting these gladiators. Irene, the slave, tries to murder him, doesn't. He's trying to sort of repair things with her, having killed the other slave that she was hoping to marry and was in love with, and all this sort of thing. So you have all of that. You have, again, some good comic bits between Pullo and Varenus, the bit where Pullo, having heard that he's a hero, even though he's terribly wounded, tries to ride into Rome, steals a horse, falls off bit, and he's brought to Varenus's house to recover, and he's talking about, oh well, we're famous, we're heroes, think of all the women we could get, and the Varenus line of, if you try to have a woman in this stage you'd fall to pieces, or something to that effect. Again, the back and forth, the banter between them is rather good. There's very much an emphasis on Varenus and his wife and the whole family being a lot happier, which of course builds towards our tragedy, because Servilia, having found out this big sort of burly bloke Varenus is now following Caesar around as a senator, remembers that Octavia has told her the terrible secret that she's extracted from Octavian in the rather sordid incest plot we've had earlier in the series, that Varenus's wife had an affair while he was away, and that the child presented his grandson is in fact her son by a lover, the lover that's been killed by Octavian and Pullo, and forced to confess this. So you have all quite rushed. I mean, it was one of those things, it's been years since I've watched the whole series. I think a couple of times I've watched some of the earlier episodes, and then other things have got in the way. And at one point when I was doing those pieces for Discovery Channel in the UK, introducing them, I'd seen the series a lot. So that was donkey's years ago. And it meant that I remembered less as we went on. And I'd forgotten, I couldn't really remember before I sat down and watched this last night, how much they covered, what they dealt with, how they presented the conspiracy, the assassination, and all of these things. So it was interesting to see that, and it did feel quite rushed. I wondered, I was even trying to think, well, was the last episode longer than some of the others? But it's a fairly sort of standard length. It's not one of the longest ones. There's not a lot of embellishment. It's mostly these personal relationships, and you get the build-up to the assassination, which itself is done quite quickly. You have, as Caesar leaves his house, there's somebody, oh thank you Augustus, the cat is contributing his usual yowl. Yes, he's warning Caesar not to go. You have somebody calling out, I've got a petition for you, and all this sort of thing. Nice touch, that's the sort of thing that is happening to any Roman politician, but particularly a leader like Caesar all the time. And you famously have the Plutarch and then Shakespeare of the man who's got evidence of the conspiracy. Read this, Caesar, it's important, it's important for you personally, and Caesar saying, well, whatever's personal I'll leave till later, it's the state that matters, this sort of thing. Ignoring the beware the Ides of March from the soothsayer. You don't get that. Not sure you even get actually a mention of the Ides of March at all. You then have them going through the streets. Varenus outside, again, we've got our Senate house in the Forum, as I said. Okay, that's how they're doing things. Servilia's freedwoman or slave, or sort of her senior maid or whatever. This character's been in quite a few of the plots. Sidles up to Varenus, asks to see him again. This is what senators are for. You're supposed to be there to receive petitions, receive requests from your fellow citizens, because that's the whole idea. This is a republic. You're all part of the Commonwealth, the same group. And, she tells him this horrible secret, and he'll go off for an angry confrontation with back at home, smashing things, and then his wife commits suicide rather than, sort of said, don't hurt the child, all this sort of thing, don't hurt the boy. It's all going to lead to the rather ghastly tragedies that his family suffer. I'm not sure I quite buy it, given how happy they've been depicted. I know we've set Varenus up as a man with a raging temper and a great sense of his own personal honour, but in the circumstances of this being early on, when he's just been asked by Caesar to not just be a senator but accompany him into the Senate, that he would just dash off home and with thoughts of violence at this stage, and not talk a bit more, and that she would kill herself so readily. It makes it's very dramatic, I suppose, it on that basis, but again, none of this is historical, so we'll leave it at that. In the meantime, they do show Antony being called aside as Caesar goes into the Senate house. Antony is Caesar's fellow consul, and is considered another pretty tough character. And again, that's in the sources. So they've almost created a doublet where you've had Varenus called off and then Antony called off. The history is that it was just Antony that they pulled away. Caesar goes into the Senate. You then have them chatting and the conspirators gathering around him. It's quite well done. There are elements where you have Casca presenting a petition, wanting his brother recalled from exile. You have him grabbing Caesar's shoulder, and one of the comments recorded in the sources that Caesar's supposed to have turned around and angrily said something like, bloody Casca, what are you playing at? This sort of thing. They don't have all the lines that are recorded, and you also don't get any version of Shakespeare's Et tu, Brute. They make it fairly panicked, at least at first. Caesar does sort of fight back, looks more angry than frightened. It's done reasonably well. One of the conspirators falls over. Not quite sure. Perhaps I should have gone back and rewound it. I don't know whether they show anybody being stabbed by a fellow conspirator. There were several accidentals. Brutus is wounded. Brutus is shown as terribly reluctant even at this stage, although he probably was one of the last to stab Caesar. Again, this is their Brutus, their character they've created, rather than the impression we get from the history. And you see them sort of, exchanging this look. Caesar's already looks as if he's pretty much on his way out, and he's covered in blood, lots of wounds. Though again, most of the wounds he suffered were superficial. Again, go to the talk about killing Caesar, the Ides of March, that I did a month or so ago, back in March. That will give you more detail on all of this. If you want the straight history, Brutus and Caesar sort of eye each other, then without saying anything on either side, Brutus stabs him. You do have, as Caesar falls, he tries to pull the fold of his toga over his head, which again is described as doing. Quite why, again, what understanding what anybody's doing in the last moments of their life, it was interpreted as trying to look more dignified, not sort of to be exposed to all the blood and that sort of thing. You have them all looking a bit stunned. The one who's slipped over in all the blood gets up. I thought at one point, well, did they have one killed, but rather than the wounded. You don't quite have the enthusiasm. You see Cicero and others rushing away, hurrying out, so that's realistic. Antony comes through the doorway, looks in horror, and then backs away. Again, not quite. He seems to have hidden first. The meeting with the conspirators comes later. But again, all of that will be dealt with in the second series. So you really end with the dramatic death of Julius Caesar and the big political change this is going to mean. At the same time, you've had Servilia has invited Attia to visit her. Attia has taken Octavian, and Servilia sort of basically terrifies them by saying that, well, you're in trouble now. Caesar's being murdered as we speak, and I'm not going to take my revenge on you, Attia, now, but I will. Just wait. I want you to suffer, and all this sort of thing. So again, it comes back to this personal rivalry between these two pretty formidable women, which has been a big theme of the series, becomes a theme at the end of it. Of course, Octavian wasn't in Rome on the Ides of March when Caesar's murdered. He's the other side of the Adriatic in Macedonia, preparing to accompany Caesar, at least in part, on the Eastern campaign, and getting some military training as well as continuing his education. So, okay, that's a liberty with the history, but an understandable one enough for the dramatic purposes. So you end up with Varenus in despair, regretting his anger, what he's done, Caesar dead, Brutus looking stunned, everybody else fled, we're not sure what's going to happen, and that's the end of the series. So there we go. That's 11 episodes, because we did the one double on HBO. I'd hate to add up the number of minutes of all these videos put together, but it is a little bit less than the total runtime of season 1, but nevertheless probably not by as much really as it should be. I hope these have been of interest. I know some people have been enjoying them. Judging from the numbers, it's a bit of a slog to go through a marathon of Goldsworthy watching episode after episode on this. And again, it helps. For me, it worked when I went back, and I've been watching these before I've made each video, and it's been nice to go back to the series. So that's it for the moment. One day we will do season 2, but it probably won't be for a while because I need a break, and I suspect everybody else out there needs a break. We will do some more film and TV related stuff fairly soon, probably before we start something like I, Claudius, which will be another longish haul, though very different in nature. We'll do some films, we'll do some other bits and pieces. We might do the Eagle, we might do the Eagle of the Ninth series. There's that old one, Warrior Queen, about Boudica, that I rediscovered not too long ago. We'll do Masada, so those who keep asking about that, definitely going to do that. I'm getting some of my 35mm slides of Masada and other sites in the area scanned so that I can use them as images, so we can put some of the real places alongside the TV version for that. And we'll do some other things. We'll probably, in June, we'll look at non-ancient films. We'll look at films about D-Day and the Battle for Normandy for part of the 81st anniversary and that sort of thing. So I'm going to keep doing a variety of things, and part of the aim will always be, I hope to present variety that people will enjoy, but also to do the things that I think, oh yeah, that's a great idea, I really want to do that. But I suspect this week and the next couple of weeks we'll have fairly short videos because I'm just so busy with the book. But we will get back to normal service and my longer, droning, rambling lectures that you all, well, I was going to say know and love, but no anyway, even if we don't assume the other. But that at least some people like some of the time. And the good thing with those is in YouTube is that you don't have to sit down and watch it in one go. You can do it over stages. So anyway, Rome season 1 complete. Again, I said right back at the beginning, this is something I've warmed to more and more, particularly once I saw the full version rather than the BBC version. There are bits in it that don't work for me. I'm a difficult audience for this sort of thing. But it did a great service for getting a lot of people interested in Rome and the Roman Republic and reviving the interest of others, and that's always good, regardless of the end thing. So it would have been nice if it had run its full span and got the 5 seasons, whatever it was they wanted. But it'd be nice if, you know, it inspires similar things, if not necessarily in this style, but covering the same sort of topics. So all in all, even when I've criticized things, even when I've said, oh, you know, this isn't the way it was done, or I don't think this particular character, whether it's Caesar, whether it's Brutus, whether it's Antony, let alone the sort of the largely imaginary ones like Attia, where they've taken a real person about whom nothing is known and created this character around them, whilst in terms of me, the historian, not liking aspects of this, and if I was doing it, I would do it differently. If I was telling that story, nevertheless, on its own terms, it works. The cast is really good. And, you know, you can come to this with no knowledge and probably follow it. If you have some knowledge, you'll see things, oh, that's quite nice, that's quite others. The more knowledge you have, the more things will bug you. But even so, sitting down and watching this again for the first time in years, I've enjoyed it. And in the end, with anything on TV, on film, this sort of thing, that's the most important thing. So as long as you can say that yeah, this is good, this is entertaining, this is interesting, this makes me want to see more, then while I may have quibbles about the history, they're doing a lot of stuff that's right, and there's a lot that's good about it. So we'll leave it with that for today. Thanks for watching this, and as many or all of the others in the playlist and the series as you've seen. And we'll, as I say, we'll come back one day, but we'll be doing other things before then. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.